The river ran slow that morning, wide and patient, carrying fog like a secret it wasn't ready to give up. At the bend where three currents met, an old wooden house stood on raised pilings, its porch facing the water as if it had something to say. The locals called it the crossing house. Boats passed it whether they wanted to or not. From that porch you could see everything. Ethan Cross lived there alone. He was 40, maybe a little older, tall and broad without looking impressive, the kind of strength that came from work done quietly for years. His hair was cropped short, his beard trimmed more from habit than care. He spoke rarely, and when he did, people leaned in without realizing why. His only constant companion was Rex. Rex was a German shepherd, once powerful, now gray around the muzzle, his movements slower but deliberate. One ear bent slightly forward, the result of an old injury. His eyes, however, were sharp and watchful. Rex lay on the porch most days, tracking the river the way some men track time. That afternoon, Ethan drove into town for fuel and supplies, leaving Rex resting in the bed of the truck, just as he always had. The dock was quiet until 3 speedboats slid in without warning, engines low, movements confident. 4 young men stepped onto the planks, clean clothes, expensive watches, laughter too loud for the hour. One of them noticed Rex and smirked. "Look at this," he said. "Guard dog on a scrap heap." A bottle shattered near Rex's paws. He stood immediately, calm, positioning himself between the truck and the men. He didn't bark. That only annoyed them more. The first kick came without hesitation. Art. The second landed with a dull crack that echoed across the water. Rex collapsed, struggling to rise, loyalty outweighing pain. Blood darkened his fur. Ethan heard it from inside the store. By the time he ran out, breath sharp in his chest, the men were already stepping back, amused. Rex lay shaking, still trying to stand. Before Ethan could reach them, a sheriff's cruiser rolled in slowly, dust curling around its tires. Sheriff Wade Holloway stepped out, hands resting casually on his belt, eyes already bored. "What's going on here?" he asked. "They attacked my dog," Ethan said, kneeling beside Rex, his hands slick with blood. "I want it reported." Holloway glanced at the men, then at the river, then back at Ethan. "Looks like an accident," he said calmly. "Old dog. Slippery dock." The men smiled. Ethan understood then. This wasn't random. This was a message. And it was only the beginning. Rex survived the night, barely. The veterinarian spoke in careful tones, the kind that carried warning without hope. Internal injuries. Broken ribs. Age working against him. Ethan stayed until dawn, sitting upright in a plastic chair, listening to machines breathe for the one being who had never failed him. When he returned to the river house alone, the porch felt wrong without the steady weight of Rex's presence. The river, however, moved as it always had. Boats passed after dark, more than usual, engines quiet, lights dim or non-existent. Ethan noticed. He always noticed. Over the next 2 days, patterns emerged. Certain boats slowed at the bend, waited just long enough, then moved on. Sheriff Holloway's cruiser appeared on the far bank frequently, never stopping anyone. The river crossing wasn't just water. It was a gate. An old fisherman named Luke finally said it out loud. "They want your house," he muttered, eyes fixed on the current. "Best view on the crossing. Control the porch, control the traffic." That night, Ethan pulled a small metal case from beneath the floorboards. Inside were compact cameras, infrared lenses, recorders sealed against moisture. Tools from a life he'd hoped was finished. He installed them carefully, under the dock, inside an old buoy, along the tree line. The river didn't know it was being watched. The recordings told the story clearly. Envelopes exchanged. Boats counted. Sheriff Holloway accepting payment without a word. Corruption didn't shout. It repeated itself. One evening, rain tapping softly on the roof, footsteps approached the porch. A young man stood there alone, soaked and shaking. One of the attackers. "They told me to scare you," he said. "Said my dad would lose his job if I didn't. Said you'd sell once the dog was hurt." Ethan turned on the recorder. "Who told you?" he asked. "The sheriff. And a man from the port." Ethan said nothing more. He didn't need to. Rex came home 3 days later, weak but alive. He moved slowly now, pain written into each step, yet he still placed himself between Ethan and the river without being asked. Loyalty didn't fade with strength. The pressure increased. An unsigned offer appeared on the door. Cash. Immediate. Generous. Ethan burned it. Sheriff Holloway visited that night. "You're in the way," he said calmly. "Sell the house. Take care of your dog. Accidents stop happening." Rex growled, low and steady. Ethan looked at the sheriff and replied quietly, You chose the wrong crossing. Holloway smiled. We'll see. The river, listening as it always had, carried the truth downstream. The night they came for the house, the air felt heavy as if the river itself was holding its breath. Rex sensed it first. He lifted his head, ears tightening, a low warning rumbling from his chest despite the pain it caused him. Ethan stepped onto the porch, hand resting gently on Rex's neck, feeling the familiar warmth beneath thinning fur. Multiple boats approached without lights, spreading across the water like a closing hand. Engines idled. Shadows moved. On the far bank, a familiar silhouette detached from the darkness. Sheriff Holloway walked up the path, not alone this time. 3 men followed him, movements confident, rehearsed. This doesn't need to be difficult, Holloway said, stopping at the edge of the porch. Last chance. Sell the house. Ethan didn't answer. He watched the river instead. Holloway stepped closer. You're not built for this fight. That was when the lights came on. Blue and white flooded the crossing from both directions, sharp and undeniable. Engines roared, not the quiet purr of smugglers, but the authority of federal cutters cutting clean through the current. Radios crackled. Commands echoed across the water. The men behind Holloway froze. Uniformed agents moved quickly, efficiently. The river revealed everything it had been hiding. Boats, routes, exchanges, years of quiet corruption laid bare under sudden light. Holloway turned, face pale. What did you do? He demanded. Ethan finally looked at him. I paid attention. Rex stood firm beside him, shaking but unyielding, a lighthouse refusing to go dark. Arrests followed swiftly. Envelopes became evidence. Recordings spoke louder than threats ever had. The young men cooperated. Fear dissolved under truth. By dawn, the river moved freely again. An investigator from the Coast Guard shook Ethan's hand that morning. You held the line, she said. Most people don't. Ethan shrugged. It was always here. Neighbors appeared slowly, bringing coffee, quiet thanks, presents instead of words. They had lived under pressure for years without naming it. Now they could breathe. Rex lay on the porch, resting, eyes half-lidded but alert, tracking boats that now passed openly, legally, honestly. That evening, Ethan cleaned the old lantern mounted near the porch rail. He had restored it once long ago, unsure why. This time he knew. When night fell, he lit it. The glow spread across the water, steady and unmistakable. Boats adjusted their course. The crossing aligned itself. Justice hadn't arrived loudly. It hadn't needed to. It had arrived because someone refused to move. Morning settled gently over the river, pale light stretching across the water as if smoothing a long-held wound. The house at the crossing stood exactly where it always had, weathered, stubborn, unchanged. Ethan stood barefoot on the porch, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands, watching the current move cleanly for the first time in years. Rex lay nearby, his body relaxed in a way Ethan hadn't seen since before the attack. His movements were slower now, his strength diminished, but his presence remained absolute. When distant engines hummed, one ear lifted automatically. Habit outlived pain. Federal vessels still dotted the banks, their work nearly finished. Corruption had been pulled into daylight, catalogued, dismantled. Sheriff Holloway was gone. So were the men who thought fear could buy silence. A woman from downriver brought fresh bread. An old man left spare fuel cans by the shed without a word. The crossing no longer belonged to threats whispered after dark. It belonged to everyone again. That night, a child stood at the edge of the porch, staring at Rex with wide eyes. Why does he keep watching the water? She asked. Ethan smiled softly. Because he remembers when it needed guarding. The lantern burned steadily as the sun set, its light reflecting across the surface, not commanding the river, only guiding it. Boats passed safely. Voices carried without fear. The water whispered stories it no longer had to hide. Ethan never called himself a protector. He fixed engines. Shared coffee. Kept first aid supplies stocked. People started calling the house a station, though no sign ever said so. Some things didn't need names. Rex slept more these days, curled near the porch rail, breathing slow and sure. When he dreamed, his paws twitched slightly, as if still standing watch somewhere between memory and now. Sometimes justice arrives with force. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through attention, patience, and a refusal to surrender what matters. Through an old dog who stands even when it hurts. Through a man who chooses not to look away. The river flowed on, indifferent yet honest, carrying light where darkness once ruled. And the house at the crossing stayed right where it was. A witness, a warning, and a promise kept.